So cities are becoming increasingly a very hot topic. These are two covers of two recent books written by two friends of mine. The first one is David Kilcullen, an Australian, an expert on counterinsurgency. He wrote Out of the Mountains, the Coming Age of the Urban Guerrilla. And with this book, he actually focuses on the challenges that cities are facing today. The other book is by Benjamin Barber, If Mayors Ruled the World, in which he not only shows the primacy of cities today, but also focuses on the possibility that cities are offering. And why the cities are becoming so important today is because of several changes that are ongoing in our world. One are demographic changes. According to the United Nations, by 2030, more than 80% of the world population will live in urban areas. If we look at some numbers, we see that cities with more than 1 million residents in 1950 were just 86. In 2015, it's more than 550 cities that have more than 1 million residents. So cities are increasingly becoming megalopolis. And with that, many challenges come. One of the challenges is the urban divide. So there are many dynamics that are bringing people to urban areas, from climate change to violence to the opportunities and services that cities are offering to citizens. But the divide between the have-nots and the well-to-do is increasingly big, this gap in cities. This is actually not a montage, it's a picture from São Paulo in Brazil. And on the left, you see the favelas, and on the right, a well-to-do neighborhood just separated by a slim wall. And then there is, of course, the challenge of violence, that together with the urban divide are creating cities as areas of high risk. And it is true that in the last decade, violence actually has been in decline. We have less armed conflict and we have less wars. But if we look at the global south, in urban areas, violence is intensifying and violence is on the rise. So if we just look at South America, for example, every year, 140,000 people are killed on the streets of their cities. So increasingly, we are living in urban areas that are spaces of fear. We are inhabiting cities of fear. We become citizens of fear. I have been looking at these issues now for about 20 years. I started as an advisor to the anti-mafia mayor of Palermo 20 years ago, where we looked systemically at the problem of the mafia in the city of Palermo. And for the past 15 years in Colombia, especially in Medellin, doing research among perpetrators of human rights violations, members of guerrillas, death squads, and gangs. And what I have been observing increasingly is that in the future, if not already in the present, we will have less peasants insurgency like we had in the 60s and the 70s, and more urban insurgency, less guerrillas, and more gangs. So in the 90s, we were talking in the aftermath of the Cold War of fragile state as a major risk for our order and our security. But today, really our cities, increasingly the pinpoint and fragile city, the challenge to resolve issues of violence and security. And Medellin is a case in point. I have been doing research in Medellin for the past 15 years, and it's a city that, despite very strong efforts in transformation and innovation, it always has patterns that recycle the historic violence. And so Medellin, as I said, is an example of these fragile cities that we need to tackle today. So if we want to continue basically respond and resolve the trend of violence in the world, bringing it down, today we need to focus on the cities. So we need a new paradigm. And when I spoke about these issues and about the possibility of actually transferring the wisdom and the notions from peace building to look at, through those lenses, to look at the challenges that cities are providing, the mayor of Palermo, Leoluco Orlando, told me peace building in urban areas is really about strategic community building. And with that, I leave it to Beth.
So Aldo talked about fragile cities, and I'm going to be talking about the project we're doing in facing the challenge that some of these fragile cities face. And the city we're going to be looking at is Medellin. For more than 30 years has had some very serious violence. And we wonder then, what's the narrative that people in the city are actually talking about? Are they having a narrative of loss of hope, despair, and really just dealing with their day-to-day survival? And probably a lot of the people are. But we found people in the city who have different stories. We're working with youth and community leaders who have stories of hope, optimism, possibility, and motivation. And we're working together with them in what we would call a true partnership. They bring their local knowledge, their network, their motivation, and we bring our experience and knowledge from practice and the academy together. So we started working with one of the neighborhoods or comunas called Comuna Ocho. And what we did there was we started to have a workshop trying to have people share their personal stories. And here you have groups of people sharing their personal stories. And one of the unique things that happened here, is that even though many of these people knew each other, they were able to share parts of their stories they had never heard before. And we wondered, what was it about the environment that was co-created here that allowed them to share those parts? And one of the stories they told was that when they came to Medellin, many of them came as displaced persons, that they were unsettled, and by settling in, the family tried to make the best of it, but the fathers couldn't, and many of the fathers left within 1 year, and they never saw their fathers again. So these are part of the personal stories they told. They were able to see there are many commonalities amongst their stories, and through that really develop a great sense of empathy for each other. And one of the methods we used here was something called Coordinated Management of Meaning, or CMM. And that is a communication practice and theory. And part of the premise of CMM is that the way we communicate with each other influences the nature of the relationship that we form. And the nature of the relationship we form, when you multiply that, creates the social worlds within which we live. One of the tools of CMM is something called the daisy model. They put themselves in the center, and then in the petals around the daisy, they're able to identify the significant influences in their life that shape the world the way they are today and shape their way of thinking in the world. So here we have their personal stories, and then we moved on and started to map out the significant actors, significant events in the social world of Medellin. They named a couple of different things, and interestingly enough, two of the things that were mentioned was Pablo Escobar. One was when he was alive and the leader of the biggest drug cartel and very violent man. And then when he was killed, there was more violence because now there was a power vacuum. And many of the mid-level cartel leaders were fighting for that power. In addition to that, we had them now map out a timeline. So now what they were going to do is combine the social narrative of the different events and actors in Medellin with their own personal stories. And they started to see that their narrative, their own personal narrative and the social narrative were not created by accident or independently of each other. They were both created in sync with one another. And so to change one would influence how the other was changed and vice versa. Then we had them go back to the significant events that they identified, significant events and actors, and start to understand the relationship between these events. And you can see here that Pablo Escobar is on here. And what we did for this with them is we introduced them to dynamical systems theory. And the part of the theory we wanted them to understand was how certain events reinforce the existence of others and give energy to it as reinforcing loops, and certain things inhibit or lessen the energy given. And the part we wanted them to understand about this was they can be more intentional about where they put their energy to make a difference. And here you can see the feedback loops, and the one going out from Pablo Escobar talks about the large amount of displacement and violence. So what we're saying here is that social change is not only possible, it's also necessary. And we wanted to help them transform their narratives from violence, and this is a book called Born to Die in Medellin, which is a pretty scary title of a book, by one of the former mayors, Alonso Salazar, to really work together in groups, such as the group we're working with, which is Puerta Abierta, and to come together where you have the best of the world, all the different worlds together, and that not only are their narratives changing, but our narratives about ourselves are changing as well, and together we're co-creating a shared narrative. Thank you.